Great, fantastic. Well, yeah, so welcome to my third episode of Sales Intersection, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or why I started it. It's a medium to provide my guests and I we're to discuss where we derive meaning, fulfillment, and passion for sales. Also, what unique value do we bring to the profession to contribute to it evolving in a positive direction? Obviously, this is you have a strong channel focus. This is a unique week in a lot of capacities, and I didn't have this question included in today's podcast, and then I just started thinking about it. I just wanted to get your thoughts. I'm a sales guy, and we have riots going on. We have the coronavirus. It's insane. Maybe with just the coronavirus, I would open up a podcast or a meeting with a client with nothing and just go into it. At least, I'm not trying to start a protest on my meetings or my podcast, but I feel like I at least have to address the craziness and ask my guests. Before we get into your background and the specifics, how you're dealing with a week like this. How do you go about your job? How do you customize your messaging, or how do you go about being your messaging or your interactions with clients and everyone?
Yeah, sure. So, in a time of unrest, in a time of unpredictability, in a time of, change, the analyst role actually gets more busy because people are looking for broader a sense of themselves. They're looking for, maybe some statistics. They're looking at, what other companies are doing. They're looking at those people in the know to, kind of frame it up in terms of what they should be doing. As salespeople, this is an incredible time. And, Corona coming in from a pandemic into the time that we're facing this week, it's further elevated this point of getting hyper-personalized with your client, where, we know within Corona, for example, every client is different based on the buyer type you're working with, what line of business they're running, what area in the business they're in, what industry, or better yet, sub-industry that they're in, puts them in a different frame of mind, what geography that they're in. And this isn't country by country, it's town by town, neighborhood by neighborhood type geography. It's sector, segment, and size. A small SMB flower shop is going to be going through a very different scenario than 1-800-Flowers, for example. You've got different levels of the solution. Regardless of your industry, if you're in the tech industry, there's 26 layers of the tech stack. And depending on what you're talking about, has a different impact. So if you multiply those 5 vectors together, there's 35 million conversations you could be having as a salesperson right now.
Yeah.
This is not the time to send out a mass email. This is not the time to put out a radio ad or do any mass communication.
Yeah.
You've got to understand, and as salespeople, we're good at listening. We're good at mirroring our customer. And what you need to do at this point is understand the state they're in, the psychological state that they're in.
Yeah.
And if it's a small business that's facing bankruptcy, it could be a mid-sized business that's actually improved sales and is looking to thrive on the back end of this crisis. It could be, anything in between. So you've got to really deal at a hyper-personalized level more than you ever have in your career.
Yeah, sure. I'm a senior director at this point, but I always tell, entry level, tiers or whatever through the lineup, there's no more cold calls. There's no reason to have a cold call. There's every reason in the world to be contextual and relevant. So thank you for that. So, I won't go through the list of accolades that you've collected over the years. Top 5 human beings in the world top 5, whatever. I know the list goes on, and you could check out Jay on his website or on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever to get that list. But which one of those is most special to you, Jay? There's a list of like 20 that I could say, but what's most special to you that really kind of speaks to what you care about?
Yeah, I mean, awards, when you become more visible in any community, they tend to come. Magazines will put you on lists and things like that. And it's nice recognition. But for me, I moved my career from working at, one of the biggest companies in the world, IBM, with 450,000 colleagues, to doing a startup. And right around that time, with almost no employees and not making a paycheck and wondering where, tomorrow's bills are going to get paid. Between that time, I got recognized for top 40 under 40. And it was for me, a real goal in my life to become a CEO by age of 40. And for me, that recognition, less so the recognition, but more so that achieving that goal and, being able to, lay on the floor of my small little office that we set up at a startup and, wondering if I made the worst decision ever. Those were the times that I look back and are probably the most meaningful. And to me, being an analyst now, are probably the most relatable to the people I talk to.
Yeah, that's great. And I've listened to, I've only been really in the channel space for the last maybe 5 years, and I'm a fanatic about it. The more I learn, the more I feel like there's an opportunity. As you know, it's 75% of the world's sales or transactions are through or indirect. I think it's 62 or 64% B2B software sales. Your infographic and your blog post on the space was the second most read Forrester blog in the history of Forrester. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you just have, I feel like every podcast I listen to, you have about 73 stats that you know about. And it kind of reminds me of, I'm not sure if you've seen Good Will Hunting. Where there's a scene.
Like apples?
Yeah. It's not that scene, but yeah. How do you like these apples? He's actually talking to his girlfriend, played by Minnie Driver, and she's doing her organic chemistry homework, and she's a bit flustered. It's taken her some time, and obviously, Matt Damon is bored and probably could finish it in his sleep. She's in awe of the skill and asks if he has a photographic memory and trying to get to the bottom of it. He says, "Do you play piano?" She's thinking he's joking, but he's not. And she says, I'm trying to explain it to you. Beethoven, Mozart, the greats could just play. I look at a piano and I see a bunch of keys, 3 pedals, and a box of wood. I can't play the piano. I couldn't hit the ball out of Fenway. But when it came to stuff like organic chemistry, I could just play. It's a fun analogy, but I'm also serious. Is the channel an area where you could just always play? I mean, it's like, how would you describe just how natural it is for you to be the expert,
Yeah. Well, the channel is a game of numbers. I mean, there are millions of partners. Every company in every industry is coming into tech services. So there's a lot of numbers. And when you look at anything celestial, like stars and moons and comets, and when the stars and moons align and stuff like that, I take a different approach, which is a very quantitative one, a numbers-based one. I grew up, my dad was an accountant. By the time I was 11, I was counting every penny I spent and earned and built my own program to do that. And my entire life, from my daily weight chart to every calorie I consume, like my life is actually digital. I've got everything monitored or managed and things like that. So when I get into my job and I look at all these moving parts, and there are tens of thousands of vendors and distributors, and there's these millions of partners, and looking at the customer journey and looking through a salesperson's eyes at all the moving parts, this is, what fascinates me, is trying to gather some, organization within the chaos to get predictable in terms of 73% of the time, this is probably going to happen. So you're okay in terms of leading that. But if you find out it's the other 27%, here's the other avenue to go.
Sure.
Learning that, every path isn't, paved, but, in terms of being a futurist, you can layer on top of the past and understand trends and movements and shapes that are taking place. And those kind of guide you, at least into the near-term future. The next 18 months is pretty much, from a high confidence level, predictable. So by adding in all these statistics and all these trends and, talking to thousands of people per year that are experts as well, and formulating all that into something that is, easy to read and to understand and to execute, to action, is where I think my knack in life came from.
Got it. Yeah. And speaking of that, one of your top 10 trends for 2020, you've spoken a lot about the trifurcated channel, right? Influencers and a transactional channel, influencer channel, and a retention channel. And as a salesperson that came into channel sales, what I found interesting was at first the opportunity I felt there was. When I was in, I guess as it relates to how you defined the channel industry, categorizing it in 4 buckets, I think, or 6 buckets, maybe it was. I was, at a company, a startup that was trying to revolutionize the way that you gamified the industry, or new age incentives, really to improve engagement, right? Engagement usually is like 10% or 20% with their PRM, and the same thing with CMS. You got guys that why should I engage with the PRM or CMS? And if they are interacting, they're probably using messaging about the product that's outdated, right? But I also found that people in the channel were like, look, it's been this way for a long time. Like, why am I going to believe you that your product's going to change everything, right? Anyway, so I'm thinking about I'm going to just talk about a little bit of this, dissect it a little bit. But the influencer, you talked about how it's probably not smart to have Kim Kardashian, paying her half a billion dollars to articulate your software company's value prop in the right way. But you talk about how it might be picking the right person in the right medium, right? The right person, and let's say it's a podcast, to validate your product or your company, right? And I was thinking about that, and I had a couple questions. One, how I think then if that is the case, then it's going to be really important. It's going to be really important to choose the right medium. Should it be a podcast, or should it be this, a webinar or whatnot, and the right person? Do you think that is going to be something that's subjective, or is there going to be a process for that, or do you think there's going to be, a sub industry that's going to make that standardized?
Yeah, so I think that there's not one particular of anything that works. If you're a consumer company and you hire Kim Kardashian for $1 million, to go on Instagram, that's fine. You want to attribute the revenue there. Hopefully, it works out for you. In the B2B world, as salespeople know, there's a lot of moving parts. And when I look at, to get into any new market, and I get asked this question probably a dozen times a day, I look at it very specifically, and I take a very community approach. So inside of every one of those 35 million conversations that I went through at the beginning, there are communities wrapped around them. Every single buyer and every single partner inside those communities, what they read, where they go, and who they follow becomes critical. So if you want to start influencing a new set of customers in a particular area, could be a geography, it could be an industry, it could be a certain type of buyer, doesn't matter. You got to look at what their influence journey looks like. So if you look at their customer journey, 81% of them will start with a Google search. The first 2 or 3 pages of Google results are the content that's most applicable to that problem. So the people that authored that content, and it could be white papers, ebooks, magazine articles, it could be podcasts. I mean, there's 30 different things it could be. It could be a social media conversation. So the people that are behind those are really interesting to me, especially for that buyer. Yeah. But I go a step further, and if I look at that buyer and say, for all the magazines in the world, for all the different emails, the 300 emails we all get every day, and if you just kind of take me through all the layers of influence and actually tell me which ones you open, which podcasts you listen to all the way through, which shows you're going to get on an airplane when COVID is over and go to Vegas to see, what board or what association are you going to join, what peer group. So if you start asking questions in that way, it clears off the 300 emails and gets you to the 5 they actually open.
Sure.
And so when you start getting that specific, like for the channel, for example, there's 54 magazines that they read globally. There's 64 podcasts that they listen to every day. There is 150 trade shows, again, once COVID is over, that they get on a plane and go to. There is 24 associations that they're a part of. There is peer groups and thought leaders. There's 99 LinkedIn groups. There's 25 Facebook groups. So it's a big, big, big map. And I put it all on one piece of paper with all the logos. But the fact of the matter is, if I roll it downwards and if I go inside each of those logos and figure out who's the most influential, who's on the front cover of the magazine, who's on the board of the association, who's doing the keynote at that event, who's hosting the podcast, if I start answering those questions and assigning scores, and I did this work, and there's 5,000 people that influence the channel, the technology channel, for example, but I scored them. And if you score highly and you're across all these different communities, guess what? You start to roll to the top of the list. And when I sorted 5,000 people that I followed and I credited them for all the work they do to influence, I came out with the top 100 in order. These are super connectors. These are the people that are in the know for that very particular type of buyer. So if I'm a salesperson trying to sell to that buyer, I should ask myself the question. I should go do this work because it's just all digital and it's not that painful. I mean, you can get a $10 an hour intern to do it, or get your teenage daughter or son to do it if you're of that age, and have them surf the web and get you this information. But ask yourself 3 questions. Does that super connector who's influencing my buyer know who I am? Can they pull me out of a police lineup? Can they, number 2, tell about my differentiation? What's different about me versus my competitors? Why would they interject me into the conversation in front of that buyer? And number 3, most importantly, would they endorse me unprovoked? So if they're on stage, on their podcast, or even in a hotel lobby bar, when we can leave our houses again, would they say my name linked to and even introduce me into a conversation where I wouldn't be before? Super connectors have thousands of followers, not just on social, but just in general. They have a platform. They're the Kim Kardashians of a particular industry.
Mark Benioff. I bet Mark Benioff is on that top 10, huh?
Who's it?
Mark Benioff.
He is, but only in a certain area.
Okay.
So if I'm a CIO of a major company, Mark Benioff's in my influence chain. If I'm in a small and medium company putting in Salesforce teams or groups for $10 a person, I have no idea who Mark Benioff is.
Yeah.
I know who my local guy is at the Chamber of Commerce. I know who my accountant is, who makes recommendations. I know who my my tax and accounting and audit firm is that has for years given me advice on what I should do. So I know my local network. I'm not following the news and following Mark Benioff or Jeff Bezos or Tim Cook these are celebrities.
That's a great point.
But they're not super connectors for a mid-sized client, who runs a mid-sized 50-doctor clinic in upstate New York.
That's a great point, because I'm here in Silicon Valley, and oftentimes we assume this, everyone's thinking the same way we do here. I'm interested. When was the last time you opened a prospecting cold email or returned a cold phone call and had a meeting, and what jumps out at you? Why would you,
Yeah, so I'm a little bit different. I respond to every LinkedIn message. I respond to, almost every email, unless it's literally, somebody who's a prince in Nigeria who's got, $10 billion for me. But if it's a well-meaning salesperson, obviously sending through a Marketo or Eloqua or HubSpot, a chain email. A lot of times I'll just say, hey, thanks, I'm an analyst. You can remove me as a sales prospect. And a lot of times I'll get a response, hey, thanks a lot, thinning the herd, especially when you buy a list or you're scrubbing lists or you're taking them from other places. I mean, it's nice sometimes to have, you have so many false positives and false negatives and stuff. It's nice when somebody actually, takes you off their list as a prospect.
Sure.
And on the flip side, I'll actually put you on my list if, I am, interested. In my previous role, when I was buying SaaS technology and other, things to run my business, I'll actually disclose that, hey, yeah, I am in the market and things like that. So I do tend to open them. Most people tend to ignore cold. The things that work are obviously personalization. Hey, Jay, I listened to your great podcast yesterday with Eric Jones. It was fantastic. Loved the part where you talked about the 35 million conversations. Love to have one of those conversations with you. I will respond 100% of the time to somebody that spent 5 seconds of personalization.
That's great. Yeah. And I want to get into that a little bit. You talk about the transition to marketplaces, and you were somewhat alluding to the dark buyer journey, the dark funnel, I think it is, where I think at this point it's 68% of the evaluation journey is dark before they reach out to the actual company and engage a salesperson. Do you? I mean, and that's why industries like the ABM space have been blowing up, and in a lot of industries that I won't get into. Do you think there's a component of that that's associated with the lackluster job of sales leaders that haven't evolved and adapted with the times to make the buying process more interactive with the salesperson and less painful, more enjoyable, more natural, maybe?
Yeah, I think I actually don't say it's a failing of the sales team or the salesperson or sales management. It's a new buyer. And we're very clear that almost every industry is facing new types of buyers. And there's a number of things. One is that traditionally in sales, the salesperson owned the information. So for a customer to make a decision, the salesperson had the product information, feature function, the fit, the configuration, the price, all those things which a customer needed to progress in their journey. Well, the internet obviously exploded that, and where the information is actually elsewhere. And when I talk about that, those first few pages of Google after that initial search, your ability, and it's like buying a car, your ability to go look at the 365 brands of cars, which is actually a true number, there's one for every day of the year, and then to narrow it down to what you're kind of looking at, then go to those 3 shortlisted, configure them online, price them, color them. And so by the time you ever reach the dealership, you are an expert. You will know more about that car than the salesperson ever will, because the information was democratized.
Sure.
You've got it in your hands. You've been through all the videos, you've gone through all the magazines and the head-to-head tests, and you know everything. And so the salesperson will never be as smart as you. But then they sit you down for 8 hours and put you through that deal from the manager. And it's just this old school 20-year-old selling into a new buyer. And there's a lot of friction there, which companies like Tesla are blowing up right now, even questioning why we need dealers. Yeah. And in many cases, they're legislated because they have good lobby arms for 100 years. But that's breaking up in the next generation of new buyer. But every model now, if you're buying software, the same thing. You've been through all of these different things, educating yourself. 68% of buyers go through a full digital journey. And the majority of them now actually get to vendor selection before ever talking to a salesperson. So a salesperson's role now has become very digital, and not only engaging socially as well as with content and with other things early in that journey. You've also got to build relationships in the 5 people on average is a real number that influence that buyer to the point of vendor selection. Mm-hmm. If 3 or 4 people in the room, virtual room with that buyer, are mentioning your name, mentioning your company's name early in the journey, you will earn vendor selection, 99 times out of 100. It's just one of these things. You mentioned Mark Benioff. He's made the decision to recruit 250,000 new partners in the next 4 years to double their revenue. He understands that early in a customer's problem, whether you're a marketing buyer, sales buyer, customer success buyer, doesn't matter what kind of buyer, if somebody is talking to you early and often with Salesforce as almost a a foregone conclusion in that conversation, and they start talking about the stack above it and how you're going to put together this tech stack, you're going to go into vendor selection and already been decided on Salesforce. That poor salesperson that works at Microsoft who's trying to sell Dynamics is dead because the 3 or 4 people early in that journey had already,
Sure.
made the decision that that customer is going with Salesforce. So that's the battle early. So as a salesperson, you not only have to get in front of the buyer, but if you can't get in front of the buyer, you have to get in front of the majority of those people, the influencers surrounding the buyer. So this is influencing the influencer. This new buyer, the majority of their time not going to sales is a big issue because you may be losing deals now that you didn't even know there was a deal. It's not even hitting your funnel. You don't even get a crack at it from the plate. You don't even get a swing. So in this model, you have to understand influence much more than you ever have in the past. You have to understand that the majority of buyers across industry will be millennials in 3 years. There's a different demographic. There's a different behavior. There's a different psychology, and it's created a different buying journey. There's a high likelihood as a salesperson that your company's gone all to subscription or moving to subscription, which means getting the initial sale is only one part of the issue now. Now you've earned the customer for 30 days. Now, retention, renewal, how you get adoption of your product, how you get integration of your product to make it more sticky, how you earn those renewals and have that customer for life, who's out there doing the upselling and cross-selling is another trifurcated part of the channel, this influence over to retention. So companies are placing less emphasis now on the actual transaction itself. And to your question about marketplaces, 73% of these new buyers think it's very convenient to buy on the web, e-commerce, or web direct, or a marketplace. So this is the Amazon Alibaba effect of the new buyer who looks more like a consumer than ever. So whether they buy through you as a salesperson, they buy on your marketplace, they buy through somebody else's marketplace, the actual transaction now is less important than that entire buying journey and getting them as a repeat, renewing, retaining customer forever.
Got it. Yeah. And as a newcomer here to the podcast space, we're in the concluding stages here. Just a couple more questions because I want to keep my podcast short so people give me a chance as I evolve. What content? I'm sure you get a lot of requests to be on podcasts or webinars or what have you. But any kind of rapport or relationship or any of that aside, just focus on content. What content is most exciting for you to discuss right now? I have you on the podcast, and we're talking about things that you talked about 6 months ago, a year ago. But what is top of mind? What do you wish people would ask to talk about more?
Yeah, the number one topic right now, obviously, is COVID. So I do a quantified view of the channel impact, and I might be the only person in the world that's putting up numbers specifically for this industry, as opposed to, there's a lot of people predicting, how sales are going to go up or down per category. I'm trying to look at the actual providers, and, that makes me different and differentiated. And most of the requests are, hey, what's the impact on COVID for managed service providers? What's the COVID impact for system integrators? What, this U-shaped recovery in 2021, how many of them are going to go bankrupt? In that world is where we are now. I'll say second most is probably around the future. We all know we're in the middle of COVID, and this week we're in, in the middle of riots and pandemonium. The fact of the matter is there will be a return to somewhat normal. It won't be exactly where we were, but what's it going to look like? What are the opportunities? Where, if I place my, kind of sights there at the horizon, should I be doing today to come out of this stronger and perhaps, thrive against my competition by making very specific investments in people, technology, skills, other things that I can actually get stronger through these very, very tough times.
Sure. That's a fantastic answer. And great for me to think about. And finally, to conclude, just on a kind of a fun note, I did check out your website, and I think you have some areas of the website that speak to your hobbies. Boats, I think, is an area, some travel. Have you got to 100 countries yet?
Just nearing there. We're going to go to Antarctica in January, so that's the 7th continent.
Okay.
And I think we're just a handful of, like half a dozen countries away now from 100. But now you hit 100, now you want to hit 200.
Yeah. So I was going to say, if you weren't an analyst today at Forrester, really in this space at all, what, something that's more hobby related, what would you see yourself doing, or what do you see yourself doing?
Whatever I'd be doing, I'd probably be counting. I do want to sail. I put thousands of miles on cruising on a boat. I do want to sail across the ocean. That'll give you 22 days to think about other things as you're going across. Travel, pretty heavily. Look at other cultures. And I think if more people did that, we wouldn't maybe be in the position we are today.
Yeah.
Understanding that we're on this little speck, floating around in a very, very big universe. The differences melt away when you get inside other cultures. So that's a big hobby of mine. I do want to get back on the ice. I am a Canadian, so I like to hit people and take out my emotions on the ice. So definitely want to lace them up again as soon as I can. So yeah, lots to look forward to.
Looks like you have good teeth, though, so you haven't been in too many fights.
Half of them are fake.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, Jay, I do want to, tremendous heavy thank you for being on the show, and I think my viewers are going to love the answers that you gave. Really insightful. I'll be sure to send you I have a spreadsheet that I keep track of my steps every day, push-ups, glasses of water, pages I've read, all that. So maybe I'll share that with you. But thanks again, Jay, for spending some time with me today. And I'll let you know when this is edited and posted. And hey, stay safe out there. And
you too. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye, Jay.